Greetings in the name of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I, Jah Rastafari. He's ever living, He's ever faithful, He's ever sure. Thank you for being here at ReggaeTelevisionNetwork.com. And thank you, we're coming to you live from Scarborough, Ontario, Canada. And in studio this morning we have Murphy Brown. And she is a columnist, she is a radio host, but we'll talk more about that later because she's here with us for the entire hour. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
For inviting me.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm so happy for you to be here. Anyways, you know, today is a Sabbath morning, as you know, in Rasta world, and I'm always keen to let you know that it's important that you read Psalms 119 during the Sabbath hours from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. So make your heart better and make your life a little bit more straighter, and it gives you a lot of information and how to really get close to God and do His will. Anyways, we thank you for being here live from ReggaeTelevisionNetwork.com in Scarborough, Ontario. And now I will turn to Murphy Brown and we'll talk for the next little while about a lot of subjects.
Okay.
Now, I read your Father's Day piece and brought tears to my eyes. I cried. I did. I'll tell you why I cried.
Okay.
But first I wanted to ask you, how is your father doing?
He has improved since he has been in hospital since March 12th. And he has improved. Yes. He's still got a ways to go, but he has improved. We're very thankful about the improvement that we've seen.
Yeah, he had a stroke.
He did.
Yeah, and he was a policeman.
He used to be a police officer, yes, in Guyana.
In Guyana. You know, the part that brought tears to my eyes is when you talk about there was a storm and there was a...
Oh yes, rain. I was 6.
Yes.
We lived next door to the school in Kitty. It used to be Kitty Village, but when I was 6, it was no longer a village. I'm not sure what it was, because 6-year-old, you don't know, you just live with your parents. And I attended Kitty Methodist School, which was right next door. It was raining that day and my mom was at home. She could see me, but there was no way that teachers were allowing 6-year-olds or even older children to leave to go out. You could fall and drown. Guyana is below sea level. So, you know, like a lot of rain and there's a flood. So I was standing there feeling distressed. And then here comes my dad striding through the water, lift me up. I will never forget that.
How can you forget that?
And, you know, the teachers and the other children were very impressed because my dad is very tall and he is, even though I do say so myself, a very good looking man and looked very impressive and lifted me up and took me home. And whenever I think about that, I think about this poem, In My Daddy's Arms, I Am Tall and Close to the Sun. I love that poem. And, you know, whenever I read it, I think about that moment.
Wow, that's great to have a favorite poem that matches a moment in your life. Yeah, and you know, the part that also brought tears to my eyes, because you said when all the little kids were looking out to see, and they were all like a little bit jealous.
Yes, they were envious. Nobody else had a good looking father like Bob.
I would be one of those envious kids saying, I wish I had a daddy like that. But that was great. So now, you also mentioned, you mentioned that you have twins, grandchildren.
My grandchildren, Taiwo and Kehinde, their names come from the Yoruba people of Nigeria, who named twins Taiwo and Kehinde. Taiwo is the one who's born first, and Kehinde is the one who's born second.
So the boy came
So my
first.
grandson Taiwo is about 2.5 minutes older than Kehinde. My
Very good. Take his place. That's what I say. That's great. Yeah. So and of course I read your father's piece that brought tears to my eyes. So I'm going to ask you, what does family mean to Murphy, and what makes a family?
Family for me is more than blood relations. Blood relation is important. Family is whoever is close to you. When I was growing up, because my father was a police officer, we moved. I don't know about other places, but in Guyana, in those days, and I can't speak for now, police officers moved around the country So when I was 6, we were living in Kitty. When I was 8, we had moved back to Berbice, and at some point we moved to another place named Agricola. And then we moved back to Berbice when I took the Common Entrance exam, which is an exam that we used to take in Guyana when you were 11 years old. So we moved back to Berbice. I attended Berbice High School, but before I finished high school, we were in Lepem, which is in the Rupununi, part of Guyana, where we share a border with Brazil. And I attended St. Ignatius Government Secondary School, and then from there we moved back to Georgetown, and I finished school and started teaching as a student teacher.
Wow.
Yes.
So you got a chance to really mix with a lot of people who are families, but
when my grandfather always said that when his children moved away from home, he told them, your closest neighbor, your nearest neighbor is your closest family.
They'll be there something,
wherever we lived, it was interesting. My mother always called the older lady's mother. So when we lived in Kitty, it was Mother Jalu, who lived next door to us. And when we lived in Agricola, it was Mother Stewart, who lived next door to us. When we lived in Georgetown, it was Mother Goodchild and Mother Ross. And those are the women I remember who my mom kind of claimed as family. Whoever lived close to us, older people, younger people, they were, family. So family to me is not only blood relationships, because I come from a culture where there is extended family.
Right.
So we had Uncle this, sometimes who wasn't related to us, or I don't know there was a relationship, because my godfather, as far as I know, was my dad's very good friend from childhood, but I think they're related. Recently, like within the last month or so, I'm finding out that all these people maybe were related to me. So I call him Uncle Lloyd. His name is Lloyd Benjamin, and he's from the same area as my dad. They grew up in the Firish Courtland. There are 3 villages that are close. Firish, Courtland, I remember at some point. But these villages were purchased by Africans who had been enslaved. And after slavery ended, finally, on August 1st, 1838, in places like Guyana, Jamaica, Barbados, wherever the British had colonized people, slavery ended there finally on August 1st, 1838, but in Canada on August 1st, 1834.
Wow.
But in these places, the Europeans tried to get a further 6 years of free work.
Right, because there was no activism.
Yes, right. Oh, there was activism.
Okay, we'll talk about
yes.
that.
You've heard of Paul Bogle and all these people.
Right. Of course.
Right. So there was activism, there was resistance, but in Canada, slavery ended August 1st, 1834.
The moment the British...
And that was the end of that.
Yes.
In places like Guyana and Barbados and, Jamaica and so on.
In America, it went almost 30 years after, 1864.
They said, these people don't know how to be free. Let's teach them how to be free. There's going to be an apprenticeship period
to be free
for 4 years for domestic slaves who worked in the houses and around. 6 years for field slaves.
Wow.
But the Africans wouldn't have it.
Okay.
So they were protesting, and they were, there was a lot of activism.
Yeah.
I remember reading about and hearing from my elders about what happened in Trinidad and other places, but what happened in Trinidad really impressed me, where the enslaved Africans rushed the government house and said, no! We've heard that we're free, we won't have it.
Yeah.
And big fighting with them and, the British militia and all of that.
Well, you see, now you were literally raised by a village, just like
yes,
village.
So all this information I got from family, blood relations, and also from community elders.
Yeah.
Because I would listen.
Yes.
Because sometimes people my age would say, but I never heard that. Were you listening?
Were you listening?
Or were you outside
So
running around playing?
Yeah, yeah.
I was a quiet child and I sat down and I listened.
Yeah.
You know, when older people were talking, if you said something,
You want to know.
what is this child doing here? Go outside. But if you're sitting quietly,
Yeah.
you're gonna hear
You're
stuff.
gonna hear stuff. So
Right.
that's the lesson. Sit quietly and you
will
The
hear.
humblest calf drinks the most milk. The humblest calf.
I didn't know that.
Really?
That's new to me. The humblest calf.
drinks the most milk.
Oh.
Yeah, because if you're just there humbly drinking, you get a lot of it. But if you're there pushing up on the mother and getting all miserable, she's gonna say, "Go away."
Right.
Well, that's
So
great.
family to me is extended family.
Yeah.
Does not have to be blood relation. Yes.
So that ties into my next question because family and what it implies really must apply to the black family as a nation, as a race.
Right.
So maybe just tie the implications of family, just blood, neighbor, to the whole, to the wider black community. What do we need?
We need to know our history.
Okay.
This is my opinion.
Right.
If you do not value yourself
Right.
as a human being, if you see yourself through the eyes of white people whose history tells them that we are less, if you see yourself through their eyes,
You will see yourself.
you will devalue yourself.
All right.
You will devalue people who look like you.
Right.
And if you devalue people who look like you, if you feel devalued, in many cases, you will have no compunction on visiting violence on somebody who looks
There
like
you go. There you go. This black on black thing. There you go. Yes.
I don't subscribe to that black on
Alright.
black thing
Good.
because nobody says white on white or anybody else on anybody
Absolutely.
else. And there's
Clarify that.
violence. There's violence in every
Yeah.
community.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm gonna go off at a tangent here.
Yes.
When people talk about crab in the barrel, they like to talk about African people, wherever we come from, we're African, as Peter Tosh said. No matter where you come from, as long as you're a black man,
Right.
you're an African. And I really think that my brother meant to include women
Yes.
when he said, as long
Oh,
as
yeah.
you're a black man.
You meant mankind.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. We do not understand that it's not just us, it's human nature.
Yes.
So we keep blaming, like, oh, these black people, they're always pulling each other down. And I have heard people talk about African people being against each other. Wherever people are oppressed, you will have collaborators.
Yes.
There were collaborators in every struggle. Think about any struggle where people were oppressed. I'm not talking only about African people.
No.
Think about any struggle where people were oppressed.
Right.
And you will find that, and I'm not going to name any communities because, you know, oh, she said this, she said that. Wherever people are oppressed and they're struggling, you will have collaborators.
Yes.
You will have people, as the old people back in Guyana used to say, hanging their mouth where the soup is dripping. So it's not just an African thing or a black thing where you will have collaborators with the enemy or the oppressors. But if we were not a united people, we would still be enslaved.
For sure. Absolutely. Work
Okay.
was done.
There was a lot of work.
Yes.
And we may know about specific people in our communities. Like people from Guyana know about coffee, whose name was Europeanized from Kofi, because his name was Kofi. He was an Akan man from Ghana who was, you know, taken to Guyana and enslaved. And he was a house slave. When people talk about house slaves,
They heard a lot.
they did hear a lot, but there is a lot of blame about house slaves.
Okay.
You know, but Africans were not given a choice in where they were put to work.
That's right.
So you can't talk about, well, the house slaves this, house slaves that. Kofi was a house slave. He led the Berbice Revolution. Toussaint Louverture was a house slave. We know he's one of the leaders, considered the leader
Nat Turner was
of the Haitian Revolution.
Yeah.
So Kofi and other people led revolutions, and they were house slaves. And let's go back to your question. Was it about the wider family?
Yeah,
no, the African family.
Right.
And I prefer to use the word African because we're the only group of people who don't know who we are.
Yeah.
I look to Guyana, where I was born, and we are the only group who do not have our names to identify where we came from.
Yeah.
My great-grandfather's name was Kelly Murphy Jonas. Now here is an African man with an Irish name. The name has been given to successive generations of the family because my father was named for his grandfather. Murphy is his middle name, and my first name is Murphy.
Yes, very nice.
I cannot find where in a specific place in Africa that my ancestors came from. So when I chose an African name, it was Abena. I always knew my name was Abena because I was born on Tuesday. And the Akande name for a girl born on Tuesday is Abena. But I chose Agbetu as my last name in March 2007 when Brother Toyin Agbetu stood up in Westminster Abbey and challenged the British family, the British royal family, and all the hoity-toity people who were in Westminster Abbey, patting themselves on the back, congratulating themselves for ending the slave trade in 1807. Well, you know what? If they didn't enslave people, they wouldn't have to end the slave trade. So what are you congratulating yourself about?
You did something wrong to begin with. You're just writing yourself.
You're here in Westminster Abbey, surrounded with the wealth.
The wealth that you took from that time, right?
The wealth that you built on the backs of my ancestors.
Right.
So what are you celebrating?
Yeah.
Give us the money.
Yes.
Let our children have free well, it won't be free because their ancestors already paid for that.
That's right.
Let them attend university and college without having to pay fees.
They paid already.
When slavery ended, the white people who owned Africans were paid for losing their property. Our ancestors didn't get a cent. They had to work like dogs for little pittance. And those people saved up their money, in Guyana I'm talking about specifically, and bought abandoned plantations and started villages. My father was born in one of those villages.
Wow.
Irish Courtland, Gibraltar. I remember the third name. Irish Courtland, Gibraltar.
Wow. Oh, that's the third name? Okay.
One of the Gibraltar. One of the areas that Africans bought after slavery was abolished. Victoria was the first one on the east coast of Demerara, and they named it after the British monarch Victoria.
Wow.
For some reason, you know, the propaganda, people thought that Queen Victoria had freed them. No, she didn't. She would have been very happy to keep them as slaves.
Yeah.
They've got her statue big in the law courts, in front of the law courts in Georgetown, Guyana.
Okay.
She was taken down at independence and disappeared behind somewhere in the botanical gardens. And then at some point, a new government decided to reinstate her in all her
glory. So she's still there today?
She's there today.
Ah.
I didn't know that. I was writing an article and I happened to be looking at some pictures and there was Queen Victoria's statue. I said, what?
There it is.
When did she get there again?
So now that brings us right back to our next point, which is activism, right? And, you know, we talk about where we had to where we were, where we went, and where we had to come from to today. So why would you say a black race, the African race, needs activists?
We need activists because we're still at the bottom.
There you go.
Wherever we are. There's this legacy from 400 years of enslavement that hasn't disappeared.
Right.
People will say, well, why do you want to talk about that? It happened so long ago.
Because
it still affects us
today. Right.
Do you know if there's trauma in a community, somebody dies, they bring people in to speak to the people who attended that school, even people who never even met the person.
Reconciliation, to bring everybody together and celebrate that life.
Or speak to people individually. How did you feel when this happened?
Right.
And put things in place to help them overcome. Do you know when our young people witness violence in their communities? Or a few years ago when police burst people's doors down in Jamestown, in the Etobicoke area, and terrorized families. There was no counseling for those children who wet their beds when they opened their eyes as police rushed in with guns and gas masks or whatever.
No counseling.
There was no counseling for those children.
No.
Police said that they heard that there was drugs, so they come to look for the drugs. They destroy people's property. The pictures were in the papers.
Wow, yes, I did see
They
that.
burned, you see the burn marks on the refrigerators, people in their beds, they're dragging, adults out, their children are witnessing this.
And we see that if say, unfortunately, like we just had this weekend, someone from a school passes away.
That's what I'm thinking.
You've got counselors coming to the school to talk to the kids.
Even though school is no longer in session.
Yes, they brought counselors in.
So let me go back to slavery. Slavery is abolished. People are subjected to 4 more years of slavery. They had to work for 40 or 45 hours for their former owners for 4 years. And then after those 40 hours, if they worked some more, they'd get paid a pittance. Well, guess what those former owners did? They made sure they did all the work within that 40 hours so they don't have to pay them.
Wow.
And still they were able to scramble some, coins together to purchase these villages. But let me get back to the trauma of being enslaved. You have to read some of the books that are out there that some of us don't want to read because it's difficult to read these books.
But you have to go past
and even reading those books, you still cannot imagine what it was like.
Yes.
When you think about leaving your home to immigrate to a place like Canada, and if you come here and you don't get a good job, and you can't go home for like 20 years, how do you feel?
How do you feel? Empty.
Imagine being dragged away from your home as a 6-year-old child.
Right.
Put on a boat with strange looking people who brutalize you in ways that we cannot imagine. Bring you to a place where you never see your family again for the rest of your life.
Yes.
And you live and you give birth to children, men and women. But the women who gave birth to children, and those children are taken away from them when they're, 5 years old, 2 years old, and sold, and you never get to see your child again. What does that do to your psyche?
What does that do to you?
And what does that do to that child? And what does that child pass on to the child that they give birth to?
And we know about separation anxiety. We know all about those things that really plays a havoc on your mind.
So think about the trauma that went on from generation to generation.
And none has been addressed.
Nothing has been addressed. Nobody has said, you know what, that was a dreadful thing that happened to you.
So when our kids are just absolutely out of control without understanding, then we put labels on it, like black on black crime and all that.
Let me talk a little bit about that.
Yes.
I worked in the school system for years. And I saw children, especially our boys, kindergarten, they're bright, they're eager to learn, they are on a par with everybody else.
Right.
You watch some of those little boys, by the time they're in grade 2, you wouldn't believe it's the same child. They have been labeled, they have been abused. It doesn't have to be physical.
No.
They either become
mental,
belligerent.
Emotional, those are hard abuses.
They either become belligerent,
yes,
or they pull into a shell.
Right.
Many of them live up to the labels. No, live down to the labels.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they are bad children.
Wow.
They are dreadful children. They are criminals in the waiting. There is this school to jail pipeline.
Right.
You know, people think it's, no, this doesn't really happen. Look at the ones who have succeeded. And that's great. We need to celebrate those children who have succeeded.
Yes.
Because a couple weeks ago, I saw something, a young man who came to this country as an 11-year-old from Guyana and lived in a lower income neighborhood, ended up on the news because he committed this crime. A young woman who came from Guyana as an 8-year-old and lived in the same lower income neighborhood. A couple of weeks after he committed that crime, or a week after, I was at Convocation Hall at the University of Toronto celebrating with her parents her graduation from the University of Toronto.
And that was not on the news?
That was not on the news.
Yeah.
I mentioned her in one of my articles.
Yeah. So we really need to get the good stuff out there and to put the bad stuff in perspective so that we can move past this.
But what was the difference? I don't know this young man. I don't know the trauma that he encountered when he came to this country. I saw this child, the young woman whose graduation I went to, as an 8-year-old. I met her in the schoolyard of the school where I was working. Children were teasing her about her accent. At various times, children were spitting on her. And her parents and her church and the community in which she was involved supported her.
They embraced her, they surrounded her.
Oh, she was supported, she was surrounded. And she had this spirit about her that she will succeed. And her parents were there supporting her every step of the way. I don't know what kind of support this young man had.
Where are the parents? Where are his support? Where are his pillars?
I know that what I read, he came to his father. His mother was left back in Guyana. I don't know what he went through to get him to the place where he committed this crime. Where he allegedly committed this crime. Allegedly, because I wasn't there, I didn't see him. He has to have a trial, and a jury has to make a decision about whether or not he was guilty.
Actually, I always say, looking back on a lot of people I know, even my own life, I say, a child can almost always survive an absentee father, but an absentee mother, that is so crucial to the child. It's that protectiveness, that shield that's missing, and that really bodes well to who we are as human. We really need mothering. We need that nurturing.
The trauma. Back to why we need activists.
Activism,
We need activists like Elder Dudley Laws, who put his life on the line. Many times the police, they were after him for many, many years.
He passed away a few years ago, did he?
He passed away last year.
Last year?
And at his funeral, an African Canadian police officer, retired, so he could speak, stood up and spoke about how much Elder Dudley's activism assisted him, but he could not acknowledge the elder. He couldn't acknowledge him.
No,
but now he's retired, and here's Brother Dudley lying there. He can speak about it now.
So do you think there's like a conspiracy of silence that is really...
when you're in certain positions in this country as an African person, if you want to advance in your job, you cannot be an activist. You cannot be seen to support activism in the community, because
you will no longer have a job.
You won't have a job.
Right.
And there are certain white people who get nervous if they see 3 or 4 African people in a workplace talking to each other. Kind of reminds me of during slavery when they used to separate Africans who came from the same place because they were worried that they would speak to each other in their language. Language is important, you know. And foment a rebellion. So
this was
separate them.
So slavery ended in so let's take America, right? Slavery ended in America in 1865,
as far as I know.
Right. And so you're talking now, 2012. You're talking about in a position where you cannot freely express yourself if you're African American or if you're African, right? Because that jeopardizes your position.
Right.
Okay? So this is how many years after slavery ended and we're supposed to be free to express ourselves?
That's my strong point. So I know the War of 1812 is 200 years.
All right, well, you know what? Let's talk about
less than 200 years since slavery was abolished. And people expect Africans who are the descendants of enslaved people to get over it.
Well, you know,
to be on a par with everybody else who did not lose their identity,
but for
who didn't have their names taken away from them.
But for people who have been so low, started so far back,
right?
I give us lots of credit for what we are today.
Oh yes,
because it certainly takes a certain tenacity.
We've invented.
Yes, we have been trailblazers in so many things that benefit
everybody
today. Everybody. Yeah. So we, we're not a selfish group. We are definitely giving group.
Oh, we are giving.
Yes. And I also see us as very
forgiving.
Oh, that's important. And I also see us as very, very intellectually advanced.
Yes.
Because I really when I talk to especially when I read your column and I talk to people around that I know is doing well and I hear them, I'm inspired because their intellect gets me. You see? So we're tenacious, we're intelligent, and we're lucky. We're lucky because we're lucky to be here today.
Lucky.
I think we're lucky because I think a lesser race than us would not have made it through. But because I
don't think that's luck though.
Oh, well, maybe not luck, but I think it's good fortune that we didn't make it through.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's talk about some of the causes that you've been really involved in.
Well, I started out being involved in the education system because practically as soon as I came to this country, I realized that the education system was failing our children. Many of our children were being pushed out of school. They talk about dropout. Dr. George Day, who is a professor at the University of Toronto, published a book called Push Out or Dropout. That's part of the title. And our children are pushed out of school. So I became involved with the Organization of Parents of Black Children, which was founded in 1980. And through that organization, I honed my activism skills, for want of a better term, because we would make presentations to the Toronto Board of Education. That's before Mike Harris made it this big, unwieldy Toronto District School Board when, he amalgamated all these cities. And we needed to be there, and there were people who were there way before I was. I remember this one woman who was a veteran of the Organization of Parents of Black Children. She used to joke and say, I don't drink, but when you see me drunk and disorderly around the city of Toronto, know that my son has graduated from university and that part of my struggle is over. That's what she used to say, because she went through some things having immigrated here, you know, many years before I did. And people from that organization started the academic bridging program, the transitional year program at the University of Toronto to help African Canadian, African Caribbean, Native students, white students who lived in poverty and for whatever reason didn't finish high school, to do that year intensive course and get into the University of Toronto. So our community has been a very activist community. Where would we be today?
We would be nowhere.
So I was involved in the education system through the Organization of Parents of Black Children. And then in 2000, I became involved in the justice system, policing, and so on, because...
Are you part of the Black Action Committee?
I was a member of the Black Action Defense Committee, BADC, which Brother Dudley Laws led.
Right.
I am not very active anymore. You know, the years go on and you get older and you can't run around to so many meetings.
So we need young people to take over.
At one point after work, I would be attending 2 and 3 meetings.
Wow.
I would be at one meeting, I have to leave early to go to another one.
That's commitment. That's commitment.
And I remember there were people before me who were attending meetings. They would talk about this. Midnight, they're meeting because they're so concerned about what is happening. And that is how the Black Heritage Program started in 1977 at the Toronto Board of Education through the activism of these people. But in 2000, as I said, I became involved because there were 3 young men were beaten by security guards and police in St. Jamestown. And then they were charged. Yes. And that's a pattern. Beat them up and then charge them with, you know, I don't know, resisting arrest and whatever. And through a couple of young people witnessing this, not a couple, quite a few young people, because this was like about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they were traumatized. You know, we're not allowed to hit our children, but police can kick them, they can beat them, they can do whatever they want with them. So these children had never seen anything like this before. The brutalizing of young people who they knew. And that's how I became involved. This was in March 2000.
The year 2000.
And through that, I met a lot of people who were activists way before I became involved. I had been a member of BADC before that. So Brother Dudley Laws and BADC and OCAP, the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, which is not an African Canadian group, it's a white group, but they support people who live in poverty. They came into St. Jamestown and there was a demonstration, and so I was involved in that for a few years, looking at policing and how police would go into lower income neighborhoods where most of us are warehoused. Lower income neighborhoods. We're warehoused. Our children live in this fish bowl when we're warehoused in these places. And even if you manage to move out and go to a neighborhood where, you know, you own your own house or whatever, your children are still
They're
living in a
stigmatized.
fish bowl.
Yes.
Sometimes they walk through the neighborhood and police will stop them. What are you doing here?
Wow.
I live here.
Yeah.
You know, so we had security guards following our young people around. What are you doing here?
Wow.
I live and said, I'm
No chains.
coming with you to make sure that you do live there.
So no chains on our feet, but we're not free.
Right.
I see. Okay.
So that's why we need activists.
Yeah.
Because these things keep happening. I mean, the first day of January 2000, the first murder of the new millennium, a young man who was born on the African continent and lived in this country for most of his life was killed by police.
Wow.
At St. Michael's Hospital. He had taken his baby, you know, the whole absent father thing
Right.
that they like to trumpet. Here was a responsible young man in his 20s.
Right.
The child was asthmatic, and he took this child to hospital, and they killed him. They said he threatened the doctor, but to this day, they can't come up with a weapon.
The weapon.
And this is January 1st, 2000.
Wow. We're talking to Murphy Brown here today at ReggaeTelevisionNetwork.com live from Scarborough, Ontario. And we're discussing some very serious and pertinent issues to the African community, to the Black community. She's been writing about these things and being a part of these things for a long time. And we're here to pick her brain to know everything she knows. So we're really thankful to have her here live on ReggaeTelevisionNetwork.com. And so we're going to continue talking about the War of 1812, because the War of 1812 is 200 years since it happened, and Canada is celebrating its bicentennial. And I was really interested when I read what Murphy had written, because she's talking about the Canadian government of today, namely the Prime Minister Harper government of today, giving funding to different groups to celebrate this very important time in Canada's history, and also something that touches us all because we live here and we all are free, supposedly. And so she wrote this: after reading such interesting and historic information, I decided to investigate the names of the organizations that will receive some of that $2,132,964 to foster greater awareness and understanding among Canadians of the importance of this moment in our history. Not surprisingly, there was not a single African Canadian organization listed as a beneficiary of the government's generosity in providing funds in its effort to educate Canadians about our glorious war history. Now, tell us about the African contribution to the British victory success in the War of 1812.
Okay, I was being sarcastic when I wrote about our glorious war history.
Okay.
Oh yes. And there, as you said, there were no African organizations that was, you know, that were beneficiaries of that largesse.
You researched that and you found that out.
I checked.
Okay.
There were. Later on, I did get a letter, an email from somebody who said that she was part of an organization. It was not an African Canadian organization, but they are researching the contributions of African Canadians to the War of 1812.
Okay.
And since then, they've had a conference, and there are names, you know, but we're not seeing those names published, and the government still has not given any money. But the person I spoke to, and I did interview her, said that they might get money later on. But the fact is that the government has given this money to certain organizations. Right. African Canadians did contribute to the War of 1812.
Yes.
African Canadians have been involved with every conflict that this country has been involved in, since before it was named Canada. So during the War of 1812, when America attacked Canada, Richard Pierpoint, who was an elderly man at that time, having been involved in the American War of Independence, and that's how he came over here as a member of the United Empire Loyalists. And that's another thing. When Canadians talk, the government or whoever, the United Empire Loyalists, they never mention that there were African men who were members because they fought on the side of the British during that, you know, Revolutionary War of the Americans against the British. They threw them out. So you have to ask British yourself, retired to Canada.
So you have to ask yourself, is that part of the conspiracy of silence that's going on?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
Continue.
So Richard Pierpoint, who was kidnapped from Bandu in Africa when he was 15 and enslaved in America and fought in the American War of Independence, came to Canada as a member of the United Empire Loyalists with some other African men. Had lived in Canada for a while. So when the Americans attacked, because slavery was rampant in America, they were scared that if America conquered Canada, they would lose their freedom. And so Richard Pierpoint approached
and recruited. You recruited for the army.
Yes. He had this group of African men who wanted to fight to defend their country.
Their freedom too.
And they said, no, this is a white man's war, we don't want you. But when they didn't get the numbers, they said, okay, come on, you know. And they put a white man in charge who has been described as a drunkard and, you know, various dreadful things about him. But they put him in charge of these African men, not Richard Pierpoint. And these men fought bravely at different places, and there is a plaque to them in Niagara, the Niagara-on-the-Lake area. So there is some recognition. This is not taught in the school system. And if you read a book about the War of 1812, you wouldn't even see them mentioned.
Wow.
And they were not the only group. There's a group who live in Trinidad who fought in the War of 1812 on the side of the British. And when the Treaty of Ghent was signed, the British allowed some of those people to be re-enslaved, people who fought on their side.
Wow.
But some of those people were lucky. Should I use the word lucky? Fortunate. They were given land in Trinidad, and they were known locally as the Americans instead of Americans. The Americans. Slavery was still an institution in Trinidad in 1815 when they arrived there. But because they had fought on the side of the British, they were given land, I think in southern Trinidad. They're called the company villages. I think there's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th company. And I first learned about these people 20-something years ago. My neighbor, Brenda Pierre, who lived in one of the apartment buildings close to where I live. She was an amazing woman. She was the griot of her family. She passed away last year, April, and her brother said that at her funeral, that she was the keeper of their history. And she told me of her ancestors, Amphi and Bashana Jackson, who left the Chesapeake Bay area in Maryland as part of the group who received land in Trinidad. And her family has held on to their land to this day. And that's something about us not knowing our history. In Guyana, in many of those villages that were established by Africans after slavery, their descendants are selling their land off.
Wow, because they don't see the significance of the history.
They don't know their history. They don't know the blood, sweat, and tears that went into purchasing that land.
See, now I find that's the saddest part about where we're at right now, is that the young people not seem to be, well, is it our fault that we're not passing things on to them? Because there are only young people.
And there are books.
Yeah, books.
Say, you know, maybe people didn't know about this.
Right.
But, you know, there's an African saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that until a lion has its own historian, the hunter will be the hero in the story of the hunt.
The hunt, of course.
So we do have our historians.
Yes.
I mean, there are so many books.
Marcus Garvey, the philosophy of opinion, I talked about it a few weeks ago on the show. That is so imperative for every black family, every black home, every black child to read. Yes.
And he is considered the father of the modern Pan-African movement.
Yes, he is.
There were people even before him
Right.
who were talking about the fact that slavery is not where our history began.
No.
We had glorious ancestors. We had kingdoms. I know some of my brothers and sisters, and when I say brothers and sisters, I don't mean like only blood brothers, who do not think that we should, you know, only talk about kingdoms and emperors.
Why
and
shouldn't
kings.
we?
Yes, but they said, that's fine. But we shouldn't only talk about them because they're not the only people. The farmers and the ordinary workers from Africa.
The good people of the race, the great people who have sustained. And
but there were ordinary people who worked also. It's not only rich people who make history. Ordinary people make history too. So I just want to give that little plug. But we had glorious kingdoms. We had civilizations before the first white person set foot on the African continent.
I also said a few weeks ago, which, you know, the thought that when I started to understand our history and know who we are, is that slavery was not a destination, it was a journey.
Yes.
You see? It's not like we've reached a destination here, we have not. It's a journey.
Right.
So we have to kind of move the journey on. And so we have to start understanding, where does this journey lead us? Where does it lead us? And how do we get back on there? You see? So it's quite an amazing thing that
No, sorry, it's a book I just thought about, and if I don't write this, I will forget.
You go right ahead.
Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
I call it slave drunk.
By Dr. Joy DeGruy Leary. I have to talk about that in a minute. Yes. And so here we are in, I've lost my train of thought. What were we talking
We're in this
about?
slavery, in this dimension, what we have to do to get back there. And
yes. So Dr. Joy DeGruy Leary wrote a book called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She did this study and she wrote this book about how we're still traumatized because of what happened during slavery. And we need to understand that our history did not begin with slavery. We had universities on the African continent.
in Egypt, Alexander the Great, he invaded it.
And Europeans went there and burned, you know,
took everything.
libraries, they destroyed stuff. The Sankore University in Timbuktu. I remember when I was a child being ridiculed by an older girl because people would say things like, go to Timbuktu, and they didn't realize Timbuktu was a real place.
I know.
And I was about 9 or 10, and I guess she thought that I was showing her up when I said, but Timbuktu is a real place. My grandfather told me that. It's in Mali in West Africa, and the Sankore University was established long before, you know, there were universities in Europe. And she laughed and, you know, like, I wonder where she is today. Anyway, now we have books where you don't have to say like, well, my grandfather told me this. Because I would pick up a book and I would read it and I was, yeah, I did hear about this when I was a child. And here's somebody, one of our historians, has written about this. They did their research. People like Ivan van Sertima, who wrote They Came Before Columbus, the book, you know, They Came Before Columbus. He was born in Kitty, actually, in Kitty in Guyana, where I had that beautiful experience with my dad coming to pick me up from the school.
Wonderful.
So Ivan Van Sertima was born in Kitty. He wrote the book They Came Before Columbus. He did his research. And there are books at so many libraries. Parkdale Library, where Dr. Rita Cox started that collection. And there are a few other libraries around Toronto. And if there are no books about African history at your library, you can ask the librarian, could you recommend some books? And could you, you know, order the books to come to my local library? I'll come and pick it up. There is no excuse for us not knowing our history. There are so many books out there written by African people. Because when we write our own history, we see it through our eyes. It's different from a white person writing it. Because we've had white people write some things, like Joseph Conrad, who wrote this book about his travels in the Congo. Dreadful white supremacist racist language. And I mean, he did acknowledge that what the Belgians did in the Congo was wrong, was dreadful. But when he wrote things like the Africans had no language and they spoke gibberish and all that, is this man crazy?
Well, he is. He must be.
So we need to know our history. When people know their history, they won't do things like sell off their ancestors' land that
they'll pass it on to the next generation.
Exactly.
Knowing it's an honor to do that and a duty. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. You know, I always say, in order, because Black people's history is so jagged and so long and so painful, I always say, in order to find the truth, you have to kind of go to three sources. They always say, try and find. You go to three sources, then you get the truth. And I always say, first you have to go to biblical prophecy.
Okay.
So you have to really read your Bible and understand where things are, especially with God, right?
Okay.
And the next thing, you have to kind of look at history, because you have to know what happened. And the third thing, you have to look at geography. Where did it take place? So with those three things, if we put those three things together and research ourselves, we will find ourselves. We're clearly there.
Right.
As you said, there are books that absolutely describe us, tell us who we are, tell us where we've been, tell us what we've done, tell us what we've got to do. So we've got to make the effort to really get out there and get those sources.
Yes, it's very important that people know their history, that we understand that these names that we bear were given to us. I mean, I know people are proud of their last names because it's been handed down from generation to generation. And some of us are not comfortable with African names, but that's okay. You need to be proud of who you are, but understand that those names are not yours.
Yes. And start and if you, even if you can't find a name that's African that you feel is yours, at least get to know Africa.
Yes.
Get to know the piece of land. Get to know her. Get to know the history of her.
Know the countries that are north, south, east, west. And know the history of those
places. Because we have the news every day, all the wars and all of this and all that. We have to know where it's happening.
And we need to understand that those 54 countries were divided up by Europeans haphazardly.
Yes.
And that's why there is war between people who were pushed together to live together. And then Europeans got in there and caused division.
Yeah, lots of evils.
Lots of division. Putting one group of people against the other. Okay, this group is more intelligent, but not as intelligent as us, white people. But this group is more intelligent than this group. And so we're going to educate this group. And they are going to be in charge.
Divide and conquer.
Yes. And that's what they did. And that's what causes war on the African continent to this day. And then you've got these greedy mining companies that go in there and give one group guns go and kill this other group.
Yes. Give one group food, and
Yes.
give the next group.
Yes.
Yeah.
We need this land.
Yeah.
So this group that may have been envious of this group, give them guns. They're gonna go and slaughter these others, so that we, white people, can go in and get the land.
And one of the most horrid result of that problem is we saw it in Rwanda in 1994.
Yes. And a lot of people, ooh, Rwanda, look at the Africans, they kill each other. Please go and read and see what really happened there.
How the French played a part.
Oh, yes.
The Belgian played a part, and how everybody put their hands in it and let it happen.
And the leaders. You've got these leaders that, like Patrice Lumumba, who was gonna really make a difference in the Congo. And the Belgians and the American government decided to go in there and get rid of him. And if you read the story of what really happened to Patrice Lumumba, you would cry.
Yes.
Because if he was content to be a figurehead and let the Belgians continue raping that land, he would be alive to this day.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he spoke out on the day they got independence, and he signed his death warrant.
Wow.
Yep.
That's terrible.
They go in and they get rid of good leaders and put in their puppets. Yeah.
Now, we know that the Canadians are not really acknowledging the black work in Canada. We know that from your article, and we know that from the fact that they're not taught in schools.
Right.
I didn't know anything about that. I remember, you know what, I remember picking up a book when I came here on my 12th birthday
Oh, okay.
in 1971. And I remember picking up a book in grade 7 or 8 or something. It fell on the floor and I picked it up. And I remember opening it up, and it said that the Japanese, they were intelligent and hardworking. And it said some other group was, and then I went, what does it say about black people? Because I was so excited, because I was also like 13, right? So I went and looked at black people, and he said, we were lazy, superstitious, and happy-go-lucky. I said, what? We were lazy, superstitious, and happy-go-lucky. This was in the book. This was in a textbook in Canada, in Canadian schools, that dropped at my foot
In 1971.
72 probably, because I came in 71. And when I read that, I thought, that's not us. I'm not superstitious.
You knew that.
I'm not superstitious.
Because
I'm happy because I'm happy, and I'm not lazy. I love to work. So right away I disputed that, but it stayed in my mind, and I thought, how many of us read that and realized that and think that that's who we are?
Think about how many people born in this country who never knew a different kind of life.
I know.
You lived in a place where you were a member of the majority until you were 12.
We were loved just because we were good. Not because we were lighter skinned or
exactly. You came from a place where you were a member of the majority. You saw people in authority who looked like you. Teachers, members of the government, and so on. Imagine somebody who was born in this country, who since the day they were born, heard, felt that they were inferior. When they pick up that book, they know that's who they are. Lazy, happy-go-lucky.
And so they go in the playfield, and they're happy-go-lucky. They're laughing and giggling for nothing, and they're talking about this and that.
They know that's who they are.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Now, some of them whose ancestors, elders, told them that's nonsense in that book.
But I also
they might get it.
Yeah.
But they might not.
They might not.
Because everything around them tells them differently.
Well, I'm telling you, the school system is doing, we're going to talk about the Afrocentric school later on, but I tell you, I have been through the school system, and when my kids, I have 4 children, and when my kids were in the school system, I started paying a little keener attention because I knew what I'd been through. And my second son came home one day with a book from junior kindergarten, okay? But at least the book I picked up, I was in grade 6, 7. And junior kindergarten, and this book has this, it's called, I Started School Today, or something like that. And this book was the most racist book I ever picked up, and it was junior kindergarten. There was only one black kid in the class. He was a savage. He was biting the teacher. He had his back turned to the classroom while all the other kids were looking at the blackboard, so he was a joker. And the next thing that when he went on the playfield, when he went on the playground, he was having a fight with everybody out there. this was what the black kid was portrayed, and this was in the school system. This was in junior kindergarten, and my second son brought it home to read for me to read to him. So it's when I didn't get to the book first, his father did. So when he got to the book and he says to me, "Honey, you better check this book out. It's kind of racist." I stopped cooking, turned off the pot, and I went and I read it. And I said, "What?" So I went. I could not believe it. I went to the school and I handed it to the principal, and I said to the principal, "This book is racist. This book causes all those fights you see out there in the playfield between black boys and white boys, because the black boy reads this and feels this is him, and the white kid reads it and feels this is the black kid. So they start to fight, right?" And you know what the principal said to me? He gave me a stack of leaves. He gave me a stack of something to fill out so that I can get this book pulled from the library. It was this thick. We sat down and we filled it out and we brought it back to him. And I got a letter from the school board basically saying that, you know, they're not in the habit of banning books, rah, 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 rah. But I don't think anything ever came from my going to the school and pointing out to the principal that this was a racist book. Talk about
activism. Now, if you had known about the Organization of Parents of Black Children, and you had come to us with that book, because I never heard of that book, you had come to us with that book, we would have gone straight to the board.
You'd have gone further.
Not to the school. We would have gone to the board.
So individually, we may not have as much power as we have together.
Right. And that's why I always tell parents, there's a problem at your child's school. The teacher, the principal, somebody has done something to them. If you're going to a meeting, please don't go by yourself. Don't go by yourself.
Yeah, I experienced that. You're basically outnumbered because they're bringing other people too.
Yes.
You're by yourself. And they're bringing the vice principal, the principal, the teacher. Everybody's there and you're by yourself.
Yes. Never go by yourself.
I experienced that. I can tell you that.
If you are an experienced activist and you think, I can handle this, please get somebody to go with you, even if just to take notes.
I see.
Because I've gone to school with people who I didn't even need to be there. They can handle it. But you need a witness. Because if they decide to lie on you, it's 4 or 5 people telling lies.
And you can't be right alone. It's all about you.
Right.
Yes.
So you need to always have somebody go with you to a meeting, especially in a case like that.
Wow.
Yes.
That's incredible.
That they didn't pull that book.
No. And the stack of sheet that I had to fill out and explain why it was, why I was thinking this. And I said, can't you just read and see? I mean, I can read and see. What do I have to fill? He says, that's the way it works. And I don't think anything ever came of it. But it said, I started school today. That's the title of that book.
I started school today. I know that I've heard from African Canadians, people who were born here, generations, their family have been here 6, 7, 8 generations, and they would speak about going to school here, where the teacher, I remember this one woman told me, the teacher called her the N-word, I'm not going to say the word, and she went to the principal in distress and told the principal, and the principal said, "But isn't that who you are?"
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So the principal is in cahoots with the teacher and everybody, and the see, this is
no, but the principal didn't see anything wrong with that. With the teacher calling her that word,
because that's the word he puts to us.
And another woman who was born and grew up in Toronto, not some town outside of Toronto. She said for her entire grade 1 year, there was a book called Little Black Sambo. The teacher would use her as an example to teach Little Black Sambo, would stand her in front of the class, say, look at her nose, and look at her lips.
Oh my!
Look at her color, and look at her hair.
Oh my!
Yes.
Oh my! So
for her entire grade 1 year.
Wow. We're not talking about all white people here. We're talking about the ones who commit crimes like these, and these are a crime. They're a crime to humanity. They're a crime to the soul. They're a crime to the heart of black people. And we know there are good people out there. We can acknowledge there's some good people, but we're talking about the ones who do these crimes, and it is a crime. It is a crime.
It is a crime.
Wow, that's terrible.
It is a crime.
Speaking of crime, now let's go on to Trayvon Martin.
Oh,
because you in your article You in one of your articles, you basically said, and I'm gonna say, you said it compares with a movie in the 1970s. I think it was 75. You said, and the movie is called Cornbread, Earl and Me, with then 12-year-old Lawrence Fishburne playing the Me, which is the Wilford Robinson character. And you say this movie in this year, 2012, February 26th, I believe, Trayvon Martin was killed.
Yes.
Okay, this movie is life imitating art.
Yes, because in Cornbread, Earl and Me, Cornbread was wearing what is described as a hoodie nowadays. And he was this young African American basketball player who was going places. He was in a store, he bought, they call it soda pop. And these two little boys bet him or challenged him that he couldn't run fast as I can't remember what. He ran out of the store. When the police shot him, it's so dramatic. The bottle went up in the air, came down, smashed, and there was the orange pop. And when I read about Trayvon Martin, I thought about Cornbread, Earl and Me. It was so similar. It was so similar. The young African American wearing the sweatshirt with the hood. He's got, all he has on him is this bottle of as we used to say in Guyana, sweet drink
and
or pop or whatever. And this boy has, a can of iced tea and Skittles. And he is killed. He's unarmed. And that's what I said, this is life imitating art.
And then here's, I guess everybody has a right to their defense. But here are people sending George Zimmerman's money because it's almost like congratulating him for killing this young black boy.
Yeah, and it happens. If you read some of the nasty comments made because of the anonymity of the internet, so people can really
express themselves. Yes.
Yes. When an African person or a racialized person is accused of a crime, the kind of things that are written, people talk about a post-racial society. You have to read these things.
The same post.
You have to read these things. And you wonder when you look, you're traveling on the subway or on the bus. Who are these people who write these things? Is one of them sitting next to me?
Yes.
Is that what they think of us?
Yes, terrible.
And then they hide behind this smile.
Wow.
But you will hear it come out sometimes where somebody will snarl, why don't you go back where you came from? I remember hearing that on the streetcar a couple years ago. Old white woman with a heavy European accent saying to a young African Canadian woman, why don't you go back where you came from?
And where did she come from? I see.
But you see, because of her white skin privilege, thinks that she has the right to say this to this woman. And when she said that, I couldn't be quiet.
Wow.
So I had to give a history lesson on the streetcar. And I was surprised that nobody felt that they could be abusive because of what I was saying. But you see, they were not anonymous. They would have to expose themselves.
Now, but they didn't.
So I had to tell her about the Africans who came here in the 1600s. That we have been here for as long as white people have been here.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So tell us, on a brighter note, because we know that his story was more positive and it came out nice. Tell us what Nelson Mandela means to you. Because after 28 years in jail, he came out and became the president of South Africa.
That's interesting because things have not changed for a lot of Africans in South Africa who are still living in poverty, who can't find a job. White people still own South Africa.
Right.
They own the economy.
Right.
Nelson Mandela may have been let out of jail, and you know, a lot of white people who called him a terrorist were like, you know, gathering around, rah rah, shake his hand. I remember reading an African American wrote, if all the white people who said that they were part of the civil rights movement really were, we wouldn't have had the struggle that we had to be able to vote. So, you know, I mean, Nelson Mandela is a symbol. White people were able to say, see, we're not that bad. We let him out of jail. We didn't kill him.
Now you talk about the civil rights movement. Talk to us a little bit about Malcolm X, because I know he means a lot to you too.
Yes, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, because that is the name he chose before he was assassinated. He came out of a school of the philosophy of the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey. His parents were Garveyites. His parents actually met in Montreal at a Garvey event. His father was a Garveyite, his mother was a Garveyite, and their white neighbors did not appreciate him stirring up their good Negroes. So they ended up murdering him brutally.
Yeah, tied him to a railroad track.
And as happened in those days, his mother was cheated of the insurance money.
Yes.
And she ended up with severe mental health
because she was
problems.
so stressed.
She had so many children. Yes. And he grew up, I guess you have to say, by the grace of God.
By the grace of God.
He ended up in jail, and that's where he became involved with the Nation of Islam. And you know, Jan Van Zandt said that people come into our lives for a reason, for a season, or for a lifetime. And the Nation of Islam came into his life for a reason and a season. And he turned his life around. That man was so intelligent.
He changed my life.
For a man who was not formally educated in the European education system, you know,
he had the best education
the system
life
that our children go through and we went through is a European system.
Of course.
He held his own.
Yes.
No, he did more than hold his own.
Created
university educated white people who tried to trick him. If you listen to some of his interviews, there were these 2 or 3 white men who tried to get him to own the European name that was foisted on his ancestors, and man, he put them to their place.
Absolutely.
About the whole name thing.
Yes, yes. He's one of my heroes.
He is. He's one of my heroes. Absolutely. Also.
Changed my life.
When I look at what he was able to achieve as somebody, as an African man, male, who was born in a culture that destroys African American males.
Yes.
No, well, African Americans, period. And at that time, that he was able to do the work he did.
Yes.
Yes, he is.
Oh, he's superhuman. Superhuman. I love him. Now, I know before we wrap up, I know that Black June Music Month means a lot to you because you wrote about that in one of your articles, and you think that that is being taken away slowly?
Oh, since Art Eggleton, 1980s, Black Music Month has been recognized with a proclamation from City Hall.
Okay.
Last year, the good mayor
Which mayor is that?
decided to rename it.
Which mayor is that?
Rob Ford
Oh, Mayor Rockford, okay.
decided to rename it. I think he called it Hip Hop and Basketball Appreciation Month. I couldn't believe this.
We want Black History
Black Music Month.
back.
Black Music Month.
That's what it's supposed to be. Okay.
And during that month, it started in the United States,
Right.
1979, with President Carter being encouraged by two African American men who were the founders of the Black Music Association. And even George Bush signed a proclamation.
I love George Bush.
Okay.
I didn't say that, but I have to say that. Mommy's name, I love George Bush. We'll talk about that. Go ahead.
Okay. And you love his Bushisms?
I just love the man. I love the man. I love his courage. I love the fact that he did something at a time when nobody thought he should do what he knew was the right thing to do. But we won't discuss that politics now. But I admire him. I love him. And right now he's in Africa. He's doing a lot of good work in Africa. I know. See, I told you we have to talk about the good white people too. Here, okay, go ahead. Finish up with the Black History Month. Black Music
And George Bush is one of them?
Yeah, but I said we're gonna have time to talk about that. We're gonna have to have time to talk about it. But I do believe that, yes.
Okay. Where were we?
Black Music Month. You're talking about the founding.
Black Music Month. Rob Ford decided to rename it last year. This year, he ignored it completely.
Ouch. So I guess we're gonna have to kind of put that back on the agenda.
But Black Music Month is very important because the music of Black people, African people, has contributed to so much. You can't even imagine. And
all genres of music.
Yes.
Blues,
Yes.
jazz, rock, name it. Even
Yes.
country and western. I love
Yes.
Charlie Pride.
And the music, there is a book called The Sound That Jazz Makes. It's a children's book. You need to read that book. I read all kinds of books, children's book, adults book.
But I have a children's book.
And The Sound That Jazz Makes traces the music from the African continent to, the Americas, the diaspora. And a lot of people don't know that there are Africans, and George Bush was one of them, that there are Africans living in every country in the Americas.
George Bush didn't know
We
that.
were enslaved in every country of the
Anyone who
Americas.
knows
North
history knows
America,
that.
Central America, South America.
Right.
George Bush was in Brazil. This has been reported widely.
Okay.
And he asked a question. So you have blacks here too? And from what I read, Condoleezza Rice had to say, "Oh yes, Mr. President,
everywhere.
There are blacks in Brazil. As a matter of fact," and I'm just telling you what I read. As a matter of fact, and the lady knew her history. There are more blacks in Brazil than anywhere else outside of the African continent.
It's a big place, Brazil.
Yes. So, yes. Anyway, African music in Argentina, in Peru,
Absolutely.
in Colombia.
Absolutely.
Actually, Joe Arroyo, and when you don't know the language, because Spanish is spoken there and I don't speak Spanish, there is this song called Rebellion where Joe Arroyo sings in Spanish, because we all speak the language that the people who enslaved our ancestors speak. And this, you would see people dancing to this music. It's amazing music. But when the words are translated, you wonder, do people listen to the words? Because he's singing about an enslaved African man whose wife was abused by the owner, and that this man rebelled. And that to this day you can still hear his voice saying, "Don't abuse my wife."
that sentiment just took
Yes,
his heart.
they said in the country, people say in the hills you can still hear his voice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Powerful.
And yeah.
So the little time we have left, I want to talk just briefly maybe about the Afrocentric school. Now, just on the record, I didn't like the name and I didn't like the concept. I thought maybe something more like Cultural School Board or the Marcus Garvey School would have started just a little bit more inclusive instead of exclusive. But that's only my opinion. But but I also think that the report card is saying that they've done well. So can you talk to us about how well they've done? Do you know anything about that?
I can't talk about how well they've done. What I can tell you about is this school came about out of a struggle,
right?
And many decades struggle,
right?
I know about the past 30 years of the struggle. There were people before me who were doing this struggle. This school did not come about because of one person, two people, or just in the 21st century.
Right.
This has been a many decade struggle, because just like the transitional year program, when students from the Caribbean came to study in Canada, and they stayed, and they got married, started their families. They realized that the education system in this country was very different from what they left back home. They were educated, even though it was a European system. The teachers respected them because of who they were. They learned about their history, their culture, and so on. And that wasn't happening here. So African Canadians also have been struggling.
Right.
I mean, the several generation people who have been here are 7, 8 generations. So it wasn't just Caribbean people who came here. This is a long struggle. The interesting thing is that this is the only alternative school where the community who wanted the school had to jump through hoops at the board to get the school established. It was only when the school was being established and we who knew about other schools started talking about it, and I wrote about it, that people said, "What? You mean there's a school for other groups?" So we knew about the School for Native Children. That is about 30-something years old. A lot of people didn't know about it. We knew about the school that was established to support gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered students. That was established more than 10 years before the Afrocentric school. White people came out to the board to vent their spleen. There's no other way of putting it, that this is dreadful. This is segregation. Well, segregation happens when white people impose that on African people, like happened in the States, like happened in Canada also. But this is a group of people saying, we want a school, and we ended up getting one little school. We want a school where our children, who we want to send to this school, we're not going to be like the African patrol going into every African home and saying, we demand your child go to the school. This is for people who will choose to send their children to this school because they want their children to learn about their history, their culture in a safe space. And people couldn't deal with that. One little school out of all the hundreds of schools in this Toronto District School Board. People came out, even some African people, African Canadian people. I don't know if they call themselves that, but they were African Canadian people. Came out and said, no, we don't like this. But that's okay, you don't have to like it.
You can continue.
Let us have this school where we can send our children who want this. However, it is a Toronto District School Board school, and so some parents were not happy about how they see things going in the school, and there was a bit of controversy around that. which was, you know,
Yeah.
splashed in the media and so on.
Wow.
But the school, the idea of an Afrocentric school is an excellent idea, and we need more than one.
Wow.
That's my opinion. We need more than one. We need at least one in each district. Yes.
Thank you so much, Murphy Brown. We have learned so much from you this morning.
Thank you for allowing me this time to.
Oh, well, you know what?
spend
I
with
want to
you.
invite you back anytime because I love this conversation. I think we have to have it more often. I think it's necessary, right? And I'm really thankful she came out, and I'm really thankful that she was able to impart all this wisdom and understanding on us. Now, next week, we're going to have Willie Williams, and he'll be performing for us, so don't miss that. But we're really thankful that you're here with us live on reggaetelevisionnetwork.com in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada. And we're so thankful that Miss Murphy Brown came in and spent some time with us and gave us all this knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. We thank you for being here. We love you for being here. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. Bye. Take
Bye.
care.
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for coming.